My name is Akia Ashman Brew, and I oversee marketing for nonprofit HR. I will be your moderator today. We have a lot of great content to cover, so let's get started. Here are a few housekeeping items before we begin. There is no dial-in for today's session. The webinar will be streamed through your computer. For the best audio quality, make sure your computer speakers are turned on and volume is up so that you can hear the presenters. Some networks cause slides to advance more slowly than others. Logging off your VPN is recommended. If your slides are behind, pushing F5 on your keyboard will help refresh the page. Webinars are bandwidth intensive, so closing any unnecessary browser tabs will help you conserve your bandwidth. At the bottom of your screen are multiple application widgets you may use. All of the widgets are resizable and movable, so feel free to move them around to maximize your screen space. You can expand your slide area or maximize it to the full screen by clicking on the box in the upper right corner. If you have any questions during the webcast, you may submit them through the Q&A widget at the bottom of your console. We will try to answer your questions during the webinar, but if not, we will follow up via email. You can find additional answers to some common technical issues located in the Help widget at the bottom of your screen. A copy of today's slides will be emailed to you tomorrow. The HRCI and SHRM activity ID will be included in that message. Okay, now let's get to the webinar. Today you'll hear from the President and CEO of Nonprofit HR, Lisa Brown Alexander. And without further ado, I hand it over to you, Lisa.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this afternoon's webinar on attracting, developing, and retaining high-performing talent. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and so I hope that each of you will walk away with something that you can immediately use in your organization to leverage your most important asset, which is your people. This afternoon, we're going to spend some time talking about this important topic, but before we do that, I wanted to be sure that each of you knew a little bit about nonprofit HR. Nonprofit HR is a full-service consulting firm that works exclusively with the nonprofit sector here in the Washington, D.C. area and across the country. We work with organizations of all types of missions and sizes to really help them leverage their most important asset, which is the talent in the organization. We provide HR consulting and outsourcing, talent acquisition services, executive search, as well as knowledge and insights like today's webinar. Let's begin. We've got 5 or 6 major things that we want to unpack today around this issue of a high-performing organization and high-performing talent. High-performing organizations is a term that we use regularly in the workplace today, but what does it really mean to be a high-performing organization? And what do those types of organizations share in common? Also important is, what do high-performing professionals or talent want from their employers? And how do we make sure that high-performing organizations can find the type of talent that they're looking for? We're going to impart some strategies around developing and retaining your high-performing talent, those of you who you've identified to be in that category, and the importance of culture and inclusion when it comes to retaining high performers. And finally, we'll give you a sense for where you might be on the high-performance readiness continuum. Let's get started. So there's some things that high-performing organizations share in common. They include leadership, design and structure, people, change management, and the level at which staff are engaged in the workplace culture. Let's spend some time talking about each of these areas and answering any questions you have as we move along. When it comes to leadership, this is probably the most important component of a high-performing organization and what attracts high performers to organizations. It's the leadership. Increasingly, high-performing job seekers are asking critical questions about leadership during the interview process. High-performing leaders also want to know about high-performing talent when they're in the interview process. And these leaders, the ones that are running high-performing organizations, also share some things in common. One of the things they share in common is that they value talent. In high-performing organizations, talent is seen as a critical asset, not as a nice-to-have or something that you fit in between programs and fundraising and finance, but critical to the delivery of the mission. So high-performing leaders seek out high-performing talent. They value talent. They seek it out aggressively. Recruiting and retention is a key part of the talent value proposition. And so these organizations and their leaders assign appropriate levels of resources so that top talent can be attracted to the organization. Leadership in these organizations also are focused on building talent at every level in the organization. They realize that high performers are not just in the C-suite, but they represent every level of the organization. High-performing leaders and high-performing organizations are also willing to take talent risks. Well, what do I mean by that? By that, I mean these leaders in these organizations are willing to hire people who on paper may not appear to be a good fit, but who bring kind of the core and critical skills needed for the job. So they may not have a resume that's 10 or 20 years long, but they have the right orientation, or they have the right acumen to do the work of the organization. They're passionate about the mission and bring an energy level to the role that the leaders in these organizations find attractive. Leaders at high-performing organizations also understand the power of aligning talent and passion to building capacity for their organizations. When we look across the spectrum of high-performing organizations, what they share in common is a strong passion for the work. And when they bring that passion to their jobs, they're able to help drive impact and outcomes faster than organizations that don't have this level of talent. So again, high-performing organizations share strong leadership in common, and those strong leaders are invested in making sure that the talent function is working and it's effective and impactful. High-performing organizations also share good organizational design. So what we mean by this is that the work of the organization, the staff in the organization, the leadership of the organization are aligned around the mission and its strategic priorities and objectives. Work is not organized in such a way that it does not drive the bottom line. And when I talk about the bottom line, I'm not necessarily talking about money as much as we are driving the bottom line of strategic priorities. So the work is aligned around that. Employees' roles are aligned to those priorities, and there's no time or space for positions that don't contribute to advancing the mission. Every role is critical, and every role is aligned to the strategic priorities. We're also finding that increasingly high-performing organizations are trying to eliminate layers of management, or at least layers of bureaucracy, between frontline staff and the CEO. Spans of control are wide. That means that individuals may have multiple people reporting to them, but they do so in a way that facilitates conversation and fluidity and collaboration across the organization. In well-defined, well-structured, and high-performing organizations, accountabilities and the right to make decisions and to collaborate is not only planned and well-defined, but it's encouraged, right? So we find that sometimes in organizations, the individuals who have the right to make decisions is limited to a small number, limited perhaps to the C-suite. And so that doesn't foster a culture of empowerment and engagement. We'll talk about that more when we talk about culture, but accountabilities and the permission to collaborate with people across program areas, across the organization is encouraged in a high-performing organization. Individual capabilities are matched to requirements. Again, this goes back to the whole notion of recruiting the right people into the organization. They're matched to the business needs of the organization. Let's keep going. The people. How can we forget the people? People and talent management in high-performing organizations is seen as an organizational priority. We've spent several months now as an organization here at Nonprofit HR exploring talent sustainability. And one of the things that we have come to realize as part of that developing a talent sustainability model is that organizations that are talent focused are also those organizations that prioritize people management. They see their brands as a critical asset to their organizational effectiveness. One of the best things that nonprofits have at their disposal is their mission. And their mission, your mission, is your employer brand. What do you do with that brand? What do you do with that mission to attract people to work for you? What are you saying on your website, on your social media channels about who you are as a place to work? Telling a compelling message, much like the message you share when you're speaking with donors and with funders, if you use that same level of energy and leverage the same kind of marketing savvy in your messaging to talent, you'll find that you're able to attract a higher caliber of talent to your organization. They want to hear your stories. They want to know why they should come and work for you. And so we encourage organizations and have seen that high-performing organizations really leverage their employer brand. We also see that in high-performing organizations, HR is not an ancillary or relegated to an administrative function, but really seen as a strategic partner and an enabler of the mission and organizational objectives. I mentioned this earlier, but in order to be a high-performing organization and in order to attract high-performing talent, you have to allocate the appropriate resources to do so. For several years, Nonprofit HR produced the Nonprofit Employment Practices Survey. And in that survey, we regularly reported on the resources that nonprofits allocated to attract talent to their organization. So what were their recruiting budgets looking like? And sadly, on average, organizations were spending less than $1,000 a year on recruitment advertising and investing in recruitment marketing. As a result of that, we saw that many of those organizations were challenged with attracting high-performing talent to their organizations because they didn't invest in marketing their organizations to these high performers in a way that would be compelling and in a way that was competitive with other high-performing organizations. If you look across the corporate landscape, for example, at Google, Facebook, any brands that you see as highly recognizable and highly impactful, those organizations are also spending an appropriate amount of their resources on recruitment advertising. So that's something that we can model in the nonprofit sector as well. High-performing organizations also make sure that the roles that they have are staffed by the right people with the right skills. Critical talents and key roles are treated with care. Self-care and employee work-life balance is promoted. And so as you think about your own organization, think about where you are kind of on that talent sustainability spectrum and whether or not your organization is talent aware or talent focused or even maybe talent oblivious, and what that positioning might mean for your ability to attract high-performing talent. I want to pause for a moment and see if we have any questions from those of you who are listening.
We do, Lisa. Here's one. Without disclosing any name, of course, can you share an example of an HPO that was successful and one that was not too successful? A 30,000-foot overview would be helpful.
Thank you. That's a great question. I can. So we work with and have worked with a number of high-performing nonprofit organizations that not only have kind of brand recognition in the general public, but are also really good at doing what they do. One organization in particular, and of course I'll leave them unnamed, is a foundation based in New York City. And their mission is oriented around life care and self-care. They've been incredibly effective with focusing on their people and their HR infrastructure and their culture as a strategy for attracting and retaining high-performing talent. And they've been very successful in doing so. So they stepped back from their work a little bit to focus on how they can shift their culture in such a way that it would attract a different level of talent to their organization. As a result of doing so, they've been able to attract new researchers, new program managers, new people who are on their front line, which is a critical component of their mission. They've also seen a decrease in their turnover rates, in voluntary turnover rates, which is a critical measure of being able to retain the right staff. So that's just one example of an organization that was very deliberate about the people function as a way of being able to attract a higher caliber of talent. They also have raised more money in the last 2 years than they have in their entire organizational history. Again, their ability to attract high-performing talent, top caliber fundraisers, they are attributing directly to their focus on culture and their focus on people. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, and there's a follow-up to that, Lisa. While we understand that people and culture are critical for an HPO, what would be your top 3 tips to ensure this is a high priority for the CEO and in particular the CFO?
I can answer that very easily. Look at your profit and loss statement as an organization and look where you're spending the majority of your money. 9 times out of 10, as an organization, your greatest expense and your greatest investment is on your salary and benefits line. That alone speaks to the importance of protecting, nurturing, and developing the asset called people. And that's language that CFOs can relate to. You're probably spending more money than anything else in your organization, programs notwithstanding, on the people who are doing the work. And if you're making that significant amount of investment in paying people and keeping people, you should be sure that you have a strategy to retain them in such a way that you continue to keep the high performers that you have, develop potential high performers, and attract new high performers to the organization. I hope that answers your question. Let's keep moving. One of the other things that high-performing organizations share in common is their commitment to change management. I'm noticing here that we've got the wrong copy on this page, and my apologies for that. But I do want to still talk about change management as a critical component of being a high-performing organization. What we have seen is in high-performing organizations, these organizations are committed to being nimble and to making change in a way that supports their strategic objectives and their missions. They are not set in their ways such that they cannot make the change needed to reflect the changing needs of the communities that they serve, right? So in other words, High-performing organizations are organizations that are open to change, that understand the importance of changing, and that foster a culture of change, readiness, and openness among their staff. So I just wanted to be sure that we address that. We'll be sure that we correct the copy before we send it out to you. My apologies for having the wrong copy on that page. Let's talk a little bit more about culture and engagement. In the high-performing organization, and we see this across industries, across subsectors within the nonprofit sector, that culture is key. There's a statement that says culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? So it's one thing to have a really great, well-defined strategy, but if your organization's culture is not healthy, if it's not effective, it will absolutely impact your ability to be a high-performing organization. And what we've seen is in high-performing organizations, culture is neither accidental nor incidental, but essential. And it is fostered and nurtured in such a way that it's seen as a priority. We also see that culture and engagement in high-performing organizations is managed in a way that maximizes that talent investment that I just talked about in answering a listener's question around the investment that we make in talent, right? How much we're spending every week, every month in salaries and benefits. We have no choice but to invest in our talent when it comes to making sure that they remain engaged, right? If you're going to be a high-performing organization, spending time making sure that your culture, is effective and healthy and is not filled with things that impede staff's ability to be effective in their individual roles is key. It's absolutely key. I would say next to leadership effectiveness, culture effectiveness and engagement of employees is probably the next critical element of being a high-performing organization. We know that engagement is measured and cultivated to foster discretionary effort and the emotional investment made by employees. So the extent to which employees put out extra effort and that they're emotionally connected to the mission and to the culture of the organization can absolutely drive whether or not the organization is high-performing. Show me a high-performing organization, and I will show you a well-structured, well-invested in culture, and employees who are highly engaged. Conversely, when you have an organization that claims itself as high-performing, but the culture is unhealthy and employees are not engaged in their work, either at the individual level or the organizational level, chances are that's not a high-performing organization. All right, let's keep going. Oh, looks like we may have a question. Let me pause and take a question from the audience.
Yes, here's one. My employer's brand is well known, but the internal culture is not advertised well. How do we bridge this gap?
Excellent question. Excellent question. The first thing you do is you leverage your organizational brand. Take all of the elements of the brand that are well known, that are well recognized. For example, if your mission is what people know you for and respect you for, find out what resonates with your donors. What has compelled them to write another check or a bigger check year after year? And take those same elements and find a way to communicate the employee value or the employer value of those messages. So, for example, if one of the things people know you for is for your great work saving the lives of innocent children, for example, I'm making this up in terms of a brand. Take that same set of messaging and use it to attract and compel people to work for you. So the same messaging you might use to speak to your public, to your supporters is what you want to use to attract talent. And sell your organization as a wonderful, dynamic, amazing place to work. Now, I have one caution. If you're not an amazing place to work from a cultural standpoint, it's important that you refrain from selling yourself as such, because what will happen is that people will be attracted to your organization. High performers will come to your organization and in short order realize that things are not working from a culture perspective. Those same high performers, because they have options, because they can choose where they work, will leave. And chances are they may become a negative ambassador for your brand. So before you go out and sell your brand, you want to make sure that your culture and your work environment aligns with your organizational brand. If it does, sell it to the hilt. Have employees talk about it. Make sure that their testimonials are on your website. Make sure that you have a strong candidate experience so that if someone applies to your organization, they're treated well throughout the process so that even if they don't get a job with you, they feel good about who you are as an employer. Those are some of the things that you can do to bridge the gap between your organization's brand and your internal practices. I hope that helps. I'm mindful of the time, so I want to shift gears now and spend some time talking about what high performers want. We talked about what high-performing organizations share in common. Now let's talk about what people who consider themselves high-performing want from their employers. This is a great quote that I read in the Harvard Business Review several years ago about the impact that a high performer can have. You see it on screen. Take a look. A high performer can deliver 400% more productivity than the average performer. Now, if that's not a compelling reason to be a high-performing organization, I don't know what is, right? Someone asked earlier, what do I sell my CFO on? This right here is it. 400% more productivity from the same talent dollars? Who wouldn't want to do that, right? All right, let's talk more about what high performers are looking for. But let's first define what a high performer is. So a high performer is an individual who's a key contributor who demonstrates high performance on a consistent basis, I will add, is capable of making a lateral move so they can move from role to role in their organizations and are effective in the roles that they have, but they can also move upward into management, right? So every high performer is not a manager, but they have the potential to move to a management role. We got this definition from Burson by Deloitte. We think it's a good one. Burson by Deloitte is certainly a thought leader in the talent management space, and they've got lots of literature around high-performing talent. But this particular definition we thought was effective. So high-performing talent, high performers share 7 things in common. You see them on screen. Attitude and energy, courage and confidence, discipline, initiative, emotional intelligence, purpose, and trust. 7 key traits of high performers and high-performing talent. Let's talk a little bit about energy and attitude. So in this, what we see consistently and what the literature and the data tells us about high performers is that they bring a natural high energy to their work. They don't need to be pushed and prodded. They bring that to the table all on their own. They've got a high level of energy, and they bring a can-do attitude to the work. They're challenged by new opportunities, and they are driven by their own ability to get the work done. We also see that high performers bring courage and confidence to their work. So they tend to be confident about what they can accomplish and what they can achieve, and they're willing to take chances that perhaps other staff are not willing to take. So they're courageous in their work, they're not fearful generally, and they're willing to do things that they've not done before, right? They're challenged by new opportunities. We also find that high-performing talent and the literature will tell you this on a consistent basis, is that they exercise a high level of self-discipline. You give them a task, they can get it done, they monitor themselves and their timelines, they're deadline-oriented, and they have the discipline needed to see a task through from beginning to end. They bring discipline to the table. Much like the courage and the attitude components of high performers also bring a very high level of initiative. They do not need to be pumped or prodded or pushed. They will drive themselves probably harder than anyone in your organization can drive them. So they bring a high level of initiative to their work. Increasingly, we're finding that high performers also bring emotional intelligence. What do I mean by this? What I mean is that they can walk into a room and read the kind of the emotional energy of a room and shift their behavior and their actions in such a way that it evokes confidence in others and from others, but it also stimulates the high performance of others, right? So they encourage, by their own actions, others' high performance. They bring that out in others through their emotional intelligence. High-performing leaders really need to demonstrate emotional intelligence, because without it, they're not able to really get out of their employees the high performance that they need. So having emotional intelligence is increasingly a critical skill, not only of leaders, but also of those who are not leaders, but who are individual contributors. High performers also have a strong sense of purpose about themselves. So they're clear about why they've connected themselves to a particular organization. They're clear what the organization is about, and they're clear about what their role is to affecting change and to being a part of the bigger picture. You need to communicate, obviously, your purpose and your mission to them. But once they're clear about that, they can find their own purpose in that work. And then finally, high-performing talent can be trusted. They also trust others. They can be trusted because they're clear on who they are and what they're bringing to the table. They bring that attitude and energy that we talked about. They're self-disciplined, so they can be trusted. But that also means that they need to be given some space to do what it is that they've been asked to do, right? So they need to be trusted. They're both trusting and need to be trusted by leadership and by management. We've put together this quick high-performance talent model. If there are 4 kind of critical elements of high-performing talent that we want to zone in on, there are these 4. Being able to have initiative or take initiative, demonstrate initiative, consistently demonstrate positive attitude and high energy, show courage and confidence in their work, and to demonstrate emotional intelligence. Why do these 4 things matter? They matter because what we've seen in the research is that these 4 out of the 7 are the most critical components of being a high performer. We also encourage you, as you seek out high performers in your organization, to develop critical questions around these 4 components. Whether it's in the interview process when you're bringing new talent into your organization, or in the talent development process as you try to identify high performers. Measure your high performers against at least these 4 critical elements of high performance, right? What's the energy level? What is their attitude and energy like? What is their courage and confidence like on a scale from 1 to 10? And how do these folks rate in terms of emotional intelligence? And what you want to do is use these 4 elements as a way to evaluate the talent that you have within your organization, and even develop a consortium or a group of folks who are your highest performers. We know that high performers want certain things from every employer, regardless of mission, size, budget, geography. They want autonomy. They want to be able to share input, and to give and receive feedback on a consistent basis. We also know, as we mentioned earlier, that high performers want to be challenged. They want to be pushed. They want to be given work that is going to take them to their highest levels of performance. They want to have the opportunity to connect with other high performers in your organization. They also want to connect with high performers outside of your organization. And so supporting their professional development and allowing them to connect with people in and out of your organization who are like-minded is important. In other words, you need to be able to support the professional development of your high performers, both in and outside of the organization. High performers want to work in enabling cultures. Going back to this culture conversation, what they want to do is be able to connect themselves with organizations that enable them as individuals and high performers to work and to be all that they can be, but to also enable others, right? So not work in a culture or an organization that says, we can't do that, we've not done it before, that's not our practice, that's not our history, or demonstrate fear of trying new things. High performers want to be in enabling cultures. And then finally, and most importantly, if a high performer doesn't see achievement, both at the individual level in their own performance and achievement in their organizations and results and impact, they'll leave. It's really that simple. So it's critical that you create and you foster in your organization a culture of achievement and results. Report on those results. Share the results of your organization on a regular basis, either through newsletters or email or through all staff meetings. But just as you would maybe in your annual report with your donors and your funders, you want to be sure that you're communicating your achievements and your results to those who are on your staff. That's a critical need of high performers. Let me pause here and see if we have any questions from those who are listening.
We do. Are there other ways to measure employee engagement in addition to a survey?
That's a good question. Yes, there are other ways. One of the best and most cost-effective, really no-cost ways of measuring employee engagement is to conduct what we call a stay interview. So I know you're probably familiar with exit interviews. Those happen when an individual is leaving an organization. They're typically done by HR or the supervisor of the individual, and they ask a series of questions about, why are you leaving? Where are you going? Tell us about your experience before you walk out the door. But we find that the most important conversation is to have a stay interview. And in the stay interview, you're asking your high performers and those who you really want to retain, what causes them to stay? Why do they come back day after day? And what do you need to continue to do as an organization to keep them engaged and connected to their work? You also want to explore with those individuals those elements of the workplace that are hindering their individual effectiveness, or they're hindering their ability to bring their all to the table. Anything that's getting in the way of their engagement, you need to know about as the keepers of the soul and the heart of your organization. So a stay interview is a great way of measuring engagement and keeping your ear to the pulse of the ground outside of maybe an annual or biannual employee engagement survey. Nonprofit HR has some blogs and articles on our website about stay interviews, and so we encourage you, if you're interested in the stay interview process, to check out our insights for some more information on the value of stay interviews. I hope that answers your question. Let's continue. Just a quick word here on fostering a culture of inclusion and self-learning. I think it's really critical as we become a more diverse society and a more, hopefully, eventually an inclusive society, that we understand the importance of inclusion. And inclusion doesn't just refer to helping women or people of color feel included in the organization, but all employees, right? And so your high performers come from all walks of life. They may come from rural communities or urban communities. They may be young. They may be old. They may be on the program side. They may be on the ops side. They may be internally focused or externally focused. But what is critical is that you give voice to everyone in your organization and that they feel included in the success of the organization, right? And one of the best ways to do that is to create an environment where people's voices can be heard, where they're not snuffed out, where they feel included in the work of the organization and the success of the organization, regardless of their age, race, gender, orientation, religion, all of the things that we know as protected classes and differences, that there's space for those differences to live. If everyone in your organization has to be the same, if everyone has to kind of model after a certain cultural fit, you'll find that you may be challenged with attracting high performers. High performers by nature tend to be more individual in their nature, right? They tend to want space and freedom. And so in order to give them the space and freedom that they need, you also need to give them the space to feel included. And I know that may seem like an oxymoron, but inclusion is so critical. I also want to say a quick word about self-learning. What we've found and what the literature supports is that high-performing organizations are also the organizations that foster continuous learning. They're supporting the learning and development of their staff. They're encouraging people to explore new competencies and skills on an ongoing and regular basis. And so if you want to attract, develop, and retain high performers in your organizations, you want to be sure that you're fostering a culture of inclusion. All right, let's keep moving. There are a couple of things we want to talk about in a little more depth around developing and retaining high-performing staff. So we've talked about attracting, but I think it's also important to talk about what you might want to do or consider to develop and retain high performers in your organization. The first of which is developing a business case for why talent development investments are necessary, with both your board and your funders, and I would argue as well as your leadership, right? So making the business case, pulling out the data, going online and doing the research around high-performing organizations, what they share in common, what high performers want, and making the business case to your leadership to say that if we make more significant or more meaningful investments in talent, we will be able to better attract high performers to our organization. And as a result of attracting high performers, this is what will happen with our strategic objectives and our goals and our mission. That's tying all those things together is really important. We also think it's important to commit the time and the resources needed to foster that environment of continuous self-learning, right? Making sure that your policies and your practices support people going out and getting professional development. If you only contribute $100 a year to each employee to foster their professional development, for example, but the average professional membership in your area costs $800, there's a disconnect, because that means that the employee is going to have to come out of their pocket to cover their professional development. And in today's economy and today's low unemployment levels, it's critical that employers invest in their employees. And so I just want to be sure that you make sure that as an organization that you're committing both the time and the resources, financial and otherwise, to foster a culture of continuous learning. You want to enable, you want to reward self-learning for those who take the initiative to do so. And you may also, in addition to building the professional skills of those who are in your organization, you may also need to buy, right? So take a buy and build strategy when it comes to high-performing talent. You want to both build people who are inside of your organization through investments in professional development and talent development, but you'll also want to go out and buy high performers off, in the marketplace. And the only way you can buy them is to make sure that you have a culture and policies and practices that will attract them. In terms of retaining high-performing talent, there are a couple things we want to be sure that you focus on. One is to understand your culture and its impact on high performers. So going back to that stay interview, if you focus on your top performers in your organization and really try to understand what elements of the culture are working for them and what the elements of the culture that are not working for them, and make sure you understand what they are. Don't assume that you know. Don't listen to hearsay and office gossip, but ask them directly. Because what I found and what we found in doing our culture assessment work is that what leadership and HR sometimes perceives to be the culture may be very different than what employees say it is. And so making sure that you understand the impact of culture on your high performers is critical. We also encourage organizations to prioritize addressing barriers to individual and organizational effectiveness. You can find out what those barriers are through those stay interviews, through employee engagement surveys, and through individual conversations with folks. You can also get some of that data from your performance management process. So pull all of that data together and understand where there might be problems in your organization, and then prioritize addressing them and eliminating them from the culture. This is some low-hanging fruit that many organizations just simply don't do. They don't prioritize eliminating barriers to individual effectiveness. Failing to do so will absolutely drive high performers out of your organization. Now, while it may seem strange to say this, don't ignore your non-leaders or your non-performers, including management. In other words, if there are people in your organization who are not performing, that's kind of a recipe for driving your high performers out of the organization if those people continue to be non-performers and not effective in their roles. Management and non-management included. One of the things that we hear from high performers on a regular basis is that I love this organization, I love what they do, but they allow non-performers to remain in place, and that drives me crazy, and so I'm going somewhere else. So don't take for granted the non-performers in your organization and the impact that they have on high performers. We've talked about ongoing learning and the importance of fostering a culture of learning, so I can't emphasize that enough. And then listen to what your high performers are saying, understand what they're saying, act on what they're saying, and repeat. Okay? Really important that you listen to your high performers in an effort to better retain them. We've talked a little bit about engagement. Engage your high performers in strengthening the present and building the future. What do we mean by that? That your high performers are your critical assets. They're people who can help you continue to strengthen your culture, your workplace, your HR infrastructure. Listen to them, hear from them, ask them questions about what's working and what's not, and use that information to strengthen the future of your organization. You also want to engage your high performance in solutions development. Help them solve problems, or let them help you solve problems in your organization and get out of their way. Give them the problem and let them help you come up with a solution for fixing the problem. And when they give you solutions that are feasible, that are reasonable, then go ahead and act on them, because your high performers are really the ones who are taking the initiative to bring ideas to the table, right? They tend not to be the complainers, but the solution makers. So give them a task, challenge them with fixing the problems in the organization, and then get out of the way when they do. You also want to be able to create some ongoing leadership opportunities for your high performers, whether it's through a mentoring program, board committee assignments, public speaking opportunities. Your high performers will rally around those opportunities. They'll welcome the opportunities to do things outside of their traditional work, and that's a wonderful way to keep them engaged. And then finally, educate your leadership about the importance and the value of high-performing talent, and try to find a way to encourage them not to feel threatened by smart people. This is a big, big part of the equation, and I know can be very difficult, particularly if you have leadership who are threatened by smart people. But in order to retain and engage your high performers, you need to have leadership that embraces high performers as well. All right, I'm mindful of our time, so I'm going to keep going. If you have a question, feel free to ask it, and I'll just keep going until I hear that we have one. All right, this is a question to think about, and this is really more a question of reflection. But what has your organization done to support, retain, and engage diverse high performers, right? So are all of your high performers do they all share, several elements in common? Are they all female under the age of 30? Are they all males over the age of 50? Are any of them people of color? Are any of them gay or straight or bi? What do you know about the diversity of your high performers? And what is your organization specifically doing to support and retain and engage those diverse high performers, right? So this is a question that you might want to think through. Name and identify your high performers, list them one by one, and then take a look at the diversity of that group and what you might want to or need to do to engage and retain those people and to support those people based on the diversity of their needs and the diversity that they bring to your organization. You want to embrace, right, your high performers. And I don't mean literally embrace them. I don't mean give them a hug. But I mean you want to create an environment that fosters a level of comfort for your high performers, right? So you want to audit your organization's development, retention, and engagement practices as they relate to diverse staff and as they relate to high-performing staff. Regularly educate management on issues around diversity and inclusion. This is a really key part of being able to not only retain the diverse, high-performing staff that you have, but to be able to attract them, right? So if you have diverse, high-performing talent, they will attract others like them, which will help to continue to diversify your organization. But if implicit and explicit bias is living kind of strong in your organization and your diverse, high-performing staff don't feel comfortable in your organization or don't feel included in your organization, they will leave and therefore not help you attract others like them, right? Be sure that you're addressing inequities in pay and promotion as a strategy for embracing your diverse, high-performing talent. And then back to the state interview recommendation, ask questions, listen, and respond. You want to embrace difference, practice inclusion, and where your organization is struggling with that, be honest with your high performers and say, listen, we're on a journey to embracing difference in our organization, and we're at the beginning of the process. Be transparent. I think your high performers will really respect that and appreciate that. So embrace the diversity that your high performers bring and find ways to understand what those diverse high performers need and how that might help to attract others to your organization. As we wrap up today, I want to just present this high performance readiness continuum scale, right? Think about where your organization is. Are you ready? Maybe somewhat ready, not really ready, or on fire when it comes to leveraging your high-performing talent in your organization. If you're not sure, try to spend some time identifying where you might be and what you might need to do to get from not ready to somewhat ready to ready, and ready to on fire. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you probably have an amazing mission in your organization. And there are ways that you can leverage that mission and the story of your mission, your brand, to attract high performers to your organization. Don't sit on your gifts as an organization. Make sure you understand all of the tools and resources that you have at your disposal to attract the people that you want to drive success and impact to your organization. I hope that's been helpful. I want to end the presentation with just a quick note about being intentional. Developing and attracting high-performing talent is an action of intention. And as you move forward in your organization, be intentional about identifying who your high performers are, be intentional about developing them, and be intentional about retaining them. When you do this on purpose, when you plan for your high performers on purpose, I think you'll see success. I know that we have here at Nonprofit HR. We've seen it among our clients of all types of missions and sizes. When they have focused on their high performers, they've seen results both in the short term and in the long term. With the 5 minutes that we have remaining, I'd love to take any more questions that you have. So please feel free, fire them away. We'll stay right on the line all the way to 3 o'clock. So if there's anything that you want to know that we haven't addressed related to high-performing talent, let's talk about it now. Do we have any questions, Akia?
Yes, Lisa. Thank you for all the information that you shared. And here's a follow-up question. Is high performance the same as high output? Are high performers producing more or producing at higher qualities?
They are performing more, and they are performing at higher qualities. The Harvard Business Review quote was just one of many data points that are out there around the results that high performers generate for their organizations, which is why, the top brands around the country have become, I'm not going to say singularly focused, but highly focused on attracting and retaining high-performing talent to their organizations, because they know that there's a direct correlation between attracting, developing, and retaining high-performing talent and their organization's outcomes or their outputs, their products output. And so that 400% productivity quote that we talked about earlier is a direct, that's an output, right? So individuals are not only more productive individually, but they're more productive for their organizations. So yes, it is a question of outputs. In the nonprofit sector, obviously, we're not producing widgets and products as much as we are programs and community impact. And so if you're trying to change outcomes in the community that you are operating in, having a focus on high-performing talent can absolutely drive those outcomes programmatically. It can also help to attract new funding and more funding. So yes, there's a correlation between high performers and organizational outputs. I hope that answers that question.
And here's another question. High performers are also seen as your brand ambassadors, don't you think?
I do see that. Your high performers are the ones who are going to speak proudly about your organization. They'll tell others about your organization, and they'll try to attract their friends who are also high performers to work with your organization. So they're more than brand ambassadors. They're essential to building a roster of other high performers. You want to handle your high performers with care. Don't handle them as kind of nice to have, but essential to have. And really encourage them and reward them for attracting other people to your organization. You might consider a recruitment bonus for those individuals so that they can continue to be brand ambassadors for your organization. I think we have time for one more question.
Do you have tips on how to build leaders at every level?
Oh, wow. That's the topic for another day. With 2 minutes remaining, I do, but unfortunately we don't have sufficient time to delve into that. But I will say that you're likely to have some emerging leaders in your organization from among your high-performing talent pool. And so take the time to identify in a tangible way who your high performers are, and then take another step to identify who your emerging leaders are, and be intentional about not only identifying them, but developing them to let their natural leadership skills come to the surface. Give them opportunities to lead, challenge them where they may have opportunities for growth, give them the resources that they need to be successful, and watch them bloom. Again, it's all a matter of intention, but chances are you've got a whole contingent of leaders from among your high-performing staff. I think that's all the time we have today. Akia, I'll turn it back over to you. Thanks so much for listening, and we look forward to having you join us next time. Akia?
Great. Thank you, Lisa. And thank you to everyone who attended today's webinar. We hope you found it to be valuable. Thank you again to Lisa for leading today's discussion. If you'd like more information about available services or support from Nonprofit HR, please email info@nonprofithr.com or visit us on the web at nonprofithr.com. Finally, please be sure to complete the feedback survey that will pop up once the webcast has ended. Thanks again for attending, and have a wonderful day.